Do you think there's a difference between big city policing and small town policing? Is there a difference between big city police officers and small town police officers? And if you were a cop, which one would you want to be? There's a real difference. I know hundreds of police officers who left the city to go work for a smaller police service. I know some who left for a smaller police service and regretted it. And I know some who left for a small police service, then came back to work for the same service that they left. They hated it. I'd prefer to work for a larger police service. Two main reasons. Number one, way less paperwork. And number two, officer safety. In my own 20-year policing career, I've called for assistance twice. Like high priority, officer needs assistance. Meaning I need cops here on the double now because something's going to go down. The first time was outside a club in Toronto, pretty close to closing time. It was like 2 a.m. I was working solo that night, driving along Eglinton Avenue East in Scarborough. There was a commotion off to the side. You could see it was busy. Everyone was leaving the club, but something was going on. People were clearly excited. And I happened to be right there, right in front. I stepped out of my vehicle. I got on the air, advised dispatch where I was, of course, and I asked for another available unit to come by. Within 20 seconds, my car was surrounded. The whole street was packed with people, and there was a fight. Probably half a dozen guys involved. One guy already had his shirt off and people yelling and screaming, especially after seeing a police car. So I got on the air, and I think my exact words were, "Dispatch, better make that on the double. Gonna need multiple units here." Within a minute, I had another car or two there, and within minutes, there was a dozen cars on scene, backing me up. That scenario would not play out like that in some smaller towns. Second time was years later on Kingston Road in Popular. I was a school resource officer, and some guy, very well known, not a student, he was coming around the school. He was a dealer, okay? The problem is that he was also violent, and he brought violence. There's no need for me to get into the details of how it all started, but it all happened extremely fast. I knew I was going to get into it. It was also broad daylight around 3 p.m. when school was just getting out. I got on the radio, same thing, and I told the dispatcher I needed some assistance ASAP. And then the fight was on. I was on the ground with this guy, and I could tell his two friends were thinking about joining in and helping him out. Within less than a minute, there were cars pulling up on scene. Now, of course, to me, it seemed like forever, but those sirens, they were music to my ears, hearing them come off from the distance. Calls like that aren't uncommon at all, and from what I hear, they happen more often than ever. If you're on a call or you have somebody pulled over and you're dealing with them, you hear an assist call come over the air, you throw the person's info back at them if it's a vehicle stop and take off. When an officer needs assistance, it's all hands on deck. Cops will gladly drop almost everything to help out. I've been to assist calls across divisions, and just once in my career, it was a citywide assist call. Again, in a small town or remote area, you're quite often on your own. Those are two fairly obvious examples involving frontline policing, but there's also all kinds of different units which are available to assist you, or you might be required to assist them. Divisional units such as street crime, major crime. Then you got larger units like the drug squad, canine, financial crimes, sex crimes units, hold-up squad. If there's a missing vulnerable person, for example, you can access air support, the Marine unit, more officers to search the area. All these units which can immediately assist you just by picking up the phone and having them attend the scene. That kind of leads me to the second main reason why a lot of people prefer policing in the city or for a larger police service than a smaller one. And that's also the reason why some police officers who have left a larger police service came back within a year or two. The amount of paperwork and a lack of support. I'll give you some real examples. I tell stories in every video, and this won't be any different. When I was in the street crime unit, my partner and I had a high number of arrests. They were mostly for failing to comply, so people basically breaking their conditions. We'd make an arrest, transport the person to the station for processing, hand in our notes, and we were right back on the road. The whole process was fast and organized. The CIB, Criminal Investigation Bureau, would handle most of the case management, the court prep, ordering documents, and there could be a lot to it depending on the situation, but they do it all the time, so they're good at it. They have a system with checks and balances. There could be 2, 3, or 4 detective constables or detectives working together to get it done and move on to the next. They're great, professional and efficient. In some smaller services, you don't just hand them over. It's up to you. preparing a case from beginning to end, ordering court documents, all kinds of other documents, preparing statements or video interviews, gathering evidence. What took 2 or 3 detectives or detective constables who do this every day an hour, that can take you all shift. You hear it all the time. You arrest somebody, that's it. You're in for shift and possibly a lot of overtime. The domestic violence unit isn't going to take over the majority of the case for you. And that means there's one less car on the road to answer radio calls, conduct traffic enforcement, or just be seen. Fly the flag, as they say. You're stuck going over a checklist, making sure you did everything right so you don't get ripped apart by some lawyer or judge, and the accused doesn't walk free. The paperwork and the case prep is just as important as any other task in policing. You need to do things right to ensure that justice is done. The community, or the victims, I should say, they deserve that. I want to touch on one more thing here, but it's probably more appropriate if I dedicate an entire video to it. It's small-town rural residents and police officers not being very open or receptive to police officers from larger police services transferring to a rural area, to a small service, and bringing that big city police attitude with them. There's been some real issues internally. Police officers basically not happy with the officer switching over. An officer from a larger service with more resources, they may have completed the training program a lot earlier or taken a lot more specialized training, which is, of course, extremely valuable. And it can create a bit of animosity between the police officers who have been there for many, many years. I'm speaking openly about these things, about some of these issues. But even if I don't, you can believe that these conversations are being had at police services right across the country. Now, regarding officers taking that big city policing attitude with them to some of the smaller services, some of the residents and the police officers found the exact opposite was true. The officers from the city were so used to dealing with so many different things happening at once that they never really got worked up about anything. I mentioned earlier that there's police who have a hard time with this. They just couldn't relax. They need constant stimulation. Another issue, there's cops who apply to larger police services who hire more frequently because they believe they have a better chance of getting on. But they have no intentions of staying with the police service who hired them. They plan on leaving the first available opportunity they get. I'm just jumping in here. I was editing this video and I realized that I'm not being completely fair here. I've only ever worked for a larger police service for the city, so I'm clearly biased in my thoughts and my opinion. I wanted to share a quick story just to kind of balance it out a little bit. There's something called a ride-along. They used to be a lot more common, but basically it's when a person, usually not a police officer, they get partnered with a police officer or a sergeant for the shift. They attend calls, they observe. It's a real learning experience. So about 10 years ago, a police officer from a very small police service, a couple hours north of the city, they were thinking about patching over. So thinking about transferring to the city. This person was also from the city where they were participating in this ride-along. He was raised there, and he thought, naturally, he would like to transfer and go work where he grew up. So he wanted to check it out. Well, it was a busy shift. Call to call to call, 10, 15 radio calls and pending. You barely have enough time to finish your paperwork before moving on to the next high priority call. I've made videos about this in the past. After that one shift, he decided that it just wasn't for him, and he decided that he'd rather stay policing where he was. It's not that he couldn't handle it, but he hated the fact that you didn't have time to thoroughly investigate the incident. And something even more important is spend time with the complainant or the victim. In the back of your mind, you know you're going to have to get through the radio call quickly because your sergeant's probably going to be contacting you in a couple minutes asking when you're going to clear. So some of the things that I say are a good thing can also be a negative thing. There's no time to develop that relationship with the caller. And let's face it, when you rush, you might miss things. Some police officers don't want to pass a report off to other units, never to think about it again unless you have to testify about it in court one day. Some cops want to spend the time to thoroughly investigate the matter from beginning to end. Do some follow-up in the days, weeks, or months ahead. A lot of smaller town police officers, they have just as many resources, but of course, naturally not so quick. So knowing that, perhaps they're even better investigators than officers in a busy area who have so much caseload, they can't even leave their desk sometimes. Some cops don't want to work like that. And the thought of not being very busy is actually very appealing. So it would be unfair for me to say that one way is better. Not better, just what I was exposed to, what I was used to. Whether you're in a small town or a larger city, you all likely attended the same police college and passed the same training and yearly qualifications, which are required by all levels of government. I felt that when I was editing the video, I didn't do a good job explaining that. Now, this isn't the only solution, but one thing for certain, we need more cops everywhere. And just as important, I've made videos about this in the past, cops need the proper equipment to do their job effectively. If they don't have that, if they're doing without, that means the public is also doing it without. Forgive my voice, it's not quite on. Let's get back to the video. A lot of officers who work in the city are dedicated. They love their job and they do it to the best of their ability. But at the end of the shift, they get the heck out. And there's nothing wrong with that either. I've made videos in the past about cops living where they work and the good and bad. I'll have to link it up here. Again, whether I speak about these things publicly or not, these conversations are being had everywhere. I touched on two major reasons. If you have anything to add, or if I forgot something, please leave a comment. Or maybe you just disagree with me completely, and that's fine too. Just articulate your reasoning why. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you taking the time, more than you know. Be safe out there, look after one another, and I'll see you in the next video.